We've run a little late. Normally I take about 45 minutes, an hour, but you heard me last year, and we had this beautiful young lady over here, and JD, and I'll shorten my talk up. It was far better to hear the two of them, wasn't it? And I'd like to do something else if I can. I want to recognize our youngest attendee. How old are you? You're 12? Do you love America?
Yes.
We love you. Here, thanks for being a good audience. You take those home. Excuse me, let me slide through here, will you? Also, I want to introduce, hey, by the way, the Pellegrinis came. They were a little late getting here. Do you know the Pellegrinis? Nina's from Cuba, and she spoke last year at our conference and was just as spellbinding as Penny was here today. Thank you for coming, Nina. And I've got another old friend over here who also just arrived. Stand and deliver, young man. This is one of my compatriots in talk radio from Salem Communications, which is probably the largest Christian broadcasting network in America today. This is the Public Affairs Director, David Spady. David? He's also with another organization called
Americans for Prosperity.
Americans for Prosperity. I'm for that. And you're working on Agenda 21 right now?
Well, I'm working on a couple different film projects, including one on ICLEI, which is, of course, connected to Agenda 21.
I'm going to be doing that in just a second. Thank you for coming, David. It's always a joy. And keep in touch with his website, would you? It's easy to remember. Americans for what we don't have now. Americans for Prosperity. I want to take you back and do just a brief account of my own personal history with the environmental movement, and I'm going to make this quick. In 1969, I came out here to California from back east. And it was a great time to arrive in California until we had an oil spill in Santa Barbara. Does anybody remember the 1969 oil spill in Santa Barbara? Oh, the TV people had a field day with it. They came out and took pictures of oiled birds and people walking along the beach with globs of oil on the bottom of their feet. And if that wasn't bad enough, for 2 days back in Ohio, the Cuyahoga River actually caught on fire. They were showing pictures of a river on fire for 2 days. That was bad enough. Then there was Johnny Carson and Jack Parr, both making fun of the air in Southern California, which was a combination of smoke and fog. That's how they came up with smog. And everybody made jokes about Los Angeles, the place where you can see the air that you breathe, right? I got here just about that time. And everybody was fertile in our hippie days. You know what they say about generally describing people? If you're 30 years old and you're not a liberal, you don't have a heart. If you're 50 years old and you're not a conservative, you don't have a mind. You don't have a mind. You don't. I mean, we all get to the point where we come to conservatism by natural attrition. But back in those days, we thought, let's take a day and let's set it aside to care for the environment. Let's have an Earth Day. And so in April of 1970, we all went out to the beach, and does anybody remember pop-top cans? You remember people would take the pop-tops and they'd throw them in the sand, and you go to the beach, and sure enough, you cut your foot. Well, we went out with our trash bags, and we cleaned up pop-tops. And we went along the beach, and we cleaned up all the trash, and there was a lot of it back then. And we went to parks, and we cleaned up the litter there. And we asked people, don't throw stuff out of your car window. People would throw diapers out the car window. It was terrible back in those days. We weren't very conscious. Honestly, we have to admit that. And things were so bad. I remember in Pittsburgh, when I used to live back east, Pittsburgh had those big steel mills with the smokestacks, and they didn't have any filters on them. So every day of the year, it was cloudy in Pittsburgh, and most of the days it was raining cinders as you drove down the Pennsylvania Turnpike. So we're going to have an Earth Day. Everybody is going to be very conscious of taking better care of the environment. So that evening, after having cleaned up out at Santa Monica Beach, I went home and I turned on the TV set to hear the senator from Wisconsin, who was the founder of the first Earth Day. His name was Gaylord Nelson. And can I read you what the good senator had to say for David Brinkley that night? Listen to this. He said, by 1995, between 75 and 85% of all species on Earth will be extinct. Did you hear that? I mean, I'm a hippie. I didn't want the pop-top cans in the sand. And I go home, and here's the guy who founded Earth Day saying by 1995, between 75 and 85% of all species on Earth will be extinct. Well, that didn't work out, did it? And then Paul Ehrlich. Has anybody ever heard the name Paul Ehrlich? Population Bomb was the book he wrote. Old Environmentalists Never Die. Paul Ehrlich wrote the foreword for Al Gore's book, Earth in the Balance. And the same scare tactics that he was using back in the 70s, he was using for Al Gore. This is what he said, biologist. He says, population will inevitably and completely outstrip whatever small increases in food supplies we make. The people on Earth are going to starve themselves through overpopulation. And I'm beginning to see a trend here. I mean, these people are trying to scare us with one disaster after another. Think of Al Gore's movie. I mean, all he did, that was so boring. All he did was one catastrophe after another. And how do you swindle people? You either tell them how to get rich, or you tell them something terrible is going to happen to them, and you're the only person that knows how to prevent it. Let me tell you something. This environmental movement, this Agenda 21, this AB 32, this is the biggest swindle in the history of mankind. This thing is so big, nobody could imagine that there will be a con game as big as this one, and there literally are no laws that prevent it. We never thought that something this incredibly magnificent and large could possibly happen. The third person to speak on television, and this guy was on with Walter Cronkite on CBS News. His name was Ken Watt. World-class biologist. He's speaking on Earth Day, and listen to what he says. The world will be 11 degrees colder in the year 2000. This is about twice what it would take to put us in an ice age. An ice age. And then, when the ice age didn't work out, they scared us with global warming. And in between, think of all of the catastrophes that these people have imagined. I mean, whatever happened to the hole in the ozone layer? Did it heal itself? I mean, whatever happened to acid rain? Whatever happened to the rainforests in the Amazon that were going to die because we were over foresting the logging down there? It's been one catastrophe after another until finally they came up with global warming. When that didn't work, some genius PR guy said, climate change. Now, you have to admit, climate change is a stroke of genius. I mean, if there's a blizzard, it's climate change. If there's a drought, it's climate change. If Hurricane Sandy comes up the East Coast, it's climate change. It doesn't matter what happens. It's climate change. It's a brilliant tactic. Unfortunately, it's also a big lie. How many of you actually saw Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth? Yeah, most of us talk about it. Thank you. Most of us talk about it. Most of us haven't seen it. But I'd like to give you 4 inconvenient truths about Al Gore's movie. One is the globe ain't warming. 16 of the last 18 years, the Earth's temperature has remained exactly level. If anything, in the past 4 years, it has begun to drop. Forget about global warming, even though California is operating under the 2006 Global Warming Solutions Act, which is Assembly Bill 32, which also includes cap and trade. I'll get to that in just a minute. Here's inconvenient truth number 2. The oceans aren't rising. If you went to see Al Gore's movie, he said that the oceans were going to be up 53 inches in a very short time. 53 inches. That was going to swamp a lot of oceanfront property, which I can't figure out because Al Gore just bought a house in Montecito. It's right on the ocean. Does he know something that I don't know? The oceans aren't rising. I have a very, you saw on the clip that J.D. ran, you saw the professorial type who is Dr. Cal Beisner. He's a professor down in Florida. He's one of our colleagues in an organization that we are the California chapter of. It's called CFAC, the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow. Also, one of our colleagues is Lord Christopher Monckton. If you don't know Chris's name, he was the environmental advisor for Margaret Thatcher and convinced her from a scientific viewpoint that her natural reflex reactions about the climate were in fact wrong. And she, before she passed on, she became a great champion of debunking a lot of the mythology about climate change. The oceans are rising. Lord Christopher Monckton said, and this is a quote from him, if everything goes completely as it is right now, the oceans will rise 1 inch. Did you get that? 1 inch in the next 100 years. That's not going to flood anything. But my city is right now considering a plan for dealing with 53 inches of flooding at the coast. I live in Huntington Beach, and they've swallowed Al Gore's line hook and sinker. So I'm a committee of one to go to my city council meetings and to get them to see the light. And I hope that's what you'll do too. That's the purpose of me being here today. Inconvenient truth number 3. The wolves may be doing well. The polar bears are doing even better. The little polar bears that you heard about in Al Gore's movie, you know, where they were floating on an ice floe and they looked like they were going to be drowning. I don't know who gets this job, but there's somebody from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that every 10 years has to go to the Arctic and count the noses of polar bears. Think of that job. 1, 2, 3. No, wait a minute. 1, yeah, and they do that. There were 5,000 polar bears back in the 50s. There are 25,000 of them now. Polar bears are doing great, but they scare us. Just like they're scaring us with the wolves and all of the damage that they were going to do, that J.D. articulated very well. They're doing the same thing with all of us. Do you know how many endangered species there are on the list now? 10,000. Do you know what the first one is? The Abbott's booby. I can't make this stuff up, friends. That's the first one on the list. The Abbott's booby. How many of you would absolutely be heartbroken if the Abbott's booby disappeared off the face of the earth? Do you know what the last one is on the list? The Zuniga dark rice rat. I mean, in my neighborhood, we used to put out poison for rice rats and any kind of other rat that there was. But these are and isn't it something how every one of these seems to turn up wherever you want to build something? Always there's an endangered species animal, and I suppose if you're trying to save the Abbott's booby or the Zuniga dark rice rat, you're going to find them someplace. So that's inconvenient truth number 3. Here's number 4. When the UN took over Earth Day in 1971, remember we had our Earth Day in 1970. 1971, the UN held their first International Earth Day. Why? Because it was a global problem that needed a global solution. See, pollution knows no boundaries. So as a cloud of pollution is formed in China, it gets caught up in the upper atmosphere and it floats over to America. And neither China can solve it, nor can America solve it. We need the UN and the globalists to solve pollution. And they've been at it ever since 1981. You may not know this, but just a few years ago, they changed International Earth Day to, are you ready for this? International Mother Earth Day. And whenever you go to one of these UN conferences, Debbie, who's going to be speaking here in just a little while, and also David, they just went to a UN conference, and they always open up. They have the Buddhists who come, and they ring their bells and beat their drums, and then they have the Mother Gaia people. You know, Gaia worship, Mother Earth. This goes back to the Middle Ages. This is superstition that we gave up years ago. But the UN embraces it. In the 1980s, when they began cooking up what they were going to do for, first of all, the Earth Summit that the UN sponsored in 1992, and then the Kyoto Accords that they sponsored in 1997, what they were cooking up was a giant scheme called cap and trade. Do you know how it works? If I ask you to explain how cap and trade works, how many of you could come up here and make sense of it all for the rest of the crowd? It's a very complicated thing, and because they made it complicated, it doesn't get that much attention. Cap and trade says quite simply, the way the UN originated it, industrial nations of the world have caused pollution for a century. And as a result, over here are the developing nations of the world, the third world countries. And they are the victims of all this pollution that we have been belching out into the atmosphere, and it's been going through these borders, these international borders, and it's been impacting these poor people. So you folks over here in the industrial world, we're going to put a cap on your pollutions. And if you exceed that cap, you're going to have to send money reparations over here to the dictators in the third world countries. They'll know just what to do with it. That was the original cap and trade scheme. That was introduced at the Kyoto Accords in 1997. And it was so complicated, people didn't grasp it, and they didn't cover it in the media. You didn't hear about it on television. But in 2006, California adopted the Global Warming Solutions Act. It was written by that great natural scientist, Fabio Nunez. And it was signed into law by Governor Arnold Schwarzenhousekeeper. So here's this new law that comes in, and it adopted everything that Agenda 21 had said. It identified the greenhouse gases. It said we're going to turn back pollution levels to 1990 levels by the year 2020. That's exactly what's in Agenda 21. They brought it here to California. And they also introduced cap and trade. How many know that there have already been 2 cap and trade auctions in our state? The first one was last November, and the second one was held in February, and there's another one due in May on the 16th, and there will be 2 more before the end of the year. The legislature had a fist fight over what they were going to do with all of the money that came in from cap and trade. They were expecting $1 billion at every auction, and maybe $2 billion, billion with a B, at each auction. Do you know how much they made off of the first one? $200 million. Not $1 billion, $200 million. And you know why they made that much money? Because Southern California Edison made a mistake in their bid and bought 70% of the carbon auctions by mistake. This is the truth. So all of a sudden, that thing fizzled. But you know, these administrations nowadays, they put a smiley face on everything. They put a smiley face on Benghazi. They put a smiling face on everybody that applied for a 501c4 from the IRS that had Tea Party or Patriot in the title was rejected. This is the crookedest administration I've ever... I'm 75 years old. I've seen a lot of crooks. This is the worst. But the truth has a way of bubbling up, doesn't it? And the truth is coming up on environmentalism, too. More people now don't believe this nonsense than ever before in the history of the world. And I think that's because a lot of us have been talking about it now for a lot of years. I hope you'll come back. I've been able to just hit the high spots here, but I hope you'll come back and buy my book. Does that sound like a commercial? It is. My wife told me, don't come home with any books, or else you'll spend Mother's Day on the couch. So please bail me out here. The books are back there on the table. I'll be happy to sign one for you. But it goes into great detail about all of the UN and the globalists. It has quotes in there from all of the people who organized this Agenda 21 and all of the nonsense of the people who have dreamed up this globalist scheme to control the earth. I want to leave you with 3 organizations that you must be aware of. The first one is called the International Panel for Climate Change, IPCC. This is the group that, since it was founded in 1987, they have provided the UN with all of the statistical information that now has proven to be so false. They're the guys that produced the hockey stick graph for Al Gore's movie. You know, industrial or pollution levels, CO2 levels like this, and then as soon as Henry Ford creates the assembly line, immediately it goes up like that. Well, they omitted a couple of things back here, a little ice age and a global warming period back here when it was so warm that they actually named a place now that's covered with icebergs Greenland. And they grew wine there. But we'll just ignore that, and we'll just draw this straight line, and then there it is. That's the hockey stick graph. We couldn't understand from 1987 to 2009, we couldn't figure out how did they do that? How did this many scientists get bamboozled? We knew that wasn't happening. And then in 2009, and as a member of CFACT and our little organization, I am claiming my Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. But I can tell you that somebody hacked into the emails of the International Panel for Climate Change and gave you the scandal that was known as ClimateGate. Do you know who Al Gore shared his Nobel Peace Prize with when he got it? The co-recipients were the International Panel on Climate Change. This disgraced UN organization that had for 20 years been cooking the books, been putting in the information that proved their point and omitting the information that didn't. The IPCC. The other one is an organization that I'm sure you're very familiar with, and that is, and again, listen, the UN knows that they've got a bad reputation. How many think we should throw the UN out of the United States? I mean, get them out of the United States, get the United States out of the UN. We shouldn't be paying 25% of the budget. There's 194 nations in the UN. 170 of them pay 1%. Uncle Stupid, you know, the guy with the credit card in Washington, he pays 25% of the budget every year. If we didn't pay that money, we cut off the head of the snake will die. You go to your congressman and you tell them to support Ron Paul's a constant bill that he introduces into the House or into the Senate, and that is the American Sovereignty Act that says we get out of the UN and we never put our military under the command of any UN general. If you don't leave here doing one thing, you go to your congressman first thing on Monday and tell him to get us out of the UN. Now, ICLEI is the sneakiest organization that you would ever hope to stumble onto. It's a UN organization. You can go to their website. Let me explain to you ICLEI. I-C-L-E-I. The International Commission for Local Environmental Initiatives. Did you get that? The International Commission for Local Environmental Issues. What they do is, to belong to ICLEI, you have to pay dues. Your city may be one of the 160 California cities that pays dues to belong to this UN organization. And their whole goal is to implement Agenda 21. It isn't cheap to belong to this organization. But let me tell you what they do. They provide you with all of the planning goals. You don't have to write suggested legislation. They create it at the UN headquarters of ICLEI in Bonn, Germany. They create it for you. All you have to do is sign on. Lance, good to see you. Thank you for coming. Great to see you. He's one of our panelists this afternoon, so I'm going to make this real short. But ICLEI is a terrible organization. The UN knows that they cannot impose by a revolution globalism. We won't buy it. We won't give up our sovereignty voluntarily. And it's impossible that there will be some kind of a political coup or even a military coup that will rise up and that will cause the globalists to be given complete control. It won't happen. Their strategy is called piecemeal. And this is how they do it. They go to one city and they get one city to implement the goals of Agenda 21. They go to another city. They do it there. They go to another city. There's 1,600 cities now around the world that have bought into implementing the ICLEI agenda. They're having a big conference in Bonn, Germany, and if nobody else is going to speak up against it, I am. And this is no accident, friends. This is a direct assault on our national sovereignty, on our independence, and on the essential principles of individual freedom that this great nation was founded on. It is a huge threat. It isn't until you get into it and really begin to peel the onion and get down layer after layer after layer that you really understand what this is all about. I hope you get a copy of my book. It's 43 years in the making. I wrote it for 43 years, thinking up all this stuff that's been going on and going on, until finally I had to write it. It was like, well, I don't know what giving birth is like, but I'm sure. But more than anything, I want to encourage you to go back to your community. In my book, there's a to-do list of what you need to do as a committee of one to go back to your community and take action to stand up against this. Also, our panel of hope is going to be coming up here, our last panel of the day, and they're going to give you some marching orders too. Nobody came here just to be a spectator, right? Everybody came here to get motivated and to get activated, and that's what we need to do. Friends, I want to pass along, I just had another grandson this past month over in Denver. He's 5 weeks old now. And I want to pass the America that I grew up in along to him. I want it to be the land of the free and the home of the brave, and I'm sure you do too. Thank you very much.